The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
And joining us is he's an author, a publisher. He's the leader of the United States of America, Ron Chepesiuk. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing fine, Al. How are you doing?
Good. So I hear you're running for president this year.
I've been thinking about it. Throw my hat in. I would probably disappear in the plethora of candidates that are out there. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody, including the janitor in my building here, is running for president. Well,
anybody's qualified, really. It makes it that way.
Well, with the current occupant, that's very true.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of glad actually there hasn't been a whole lot of celebrity trying to jump in there. Not yet, anyway. Like,
no.
I don't want to see Oprah or any of those people jump in there. But
Oprah's been kind of quiet. Usually they always bring her name up. Somebody brings her name up, as a candidate. And then she'll hang around for a while, and then she'll shoot it down, and say, "No, I'm not a candidate." But you're right. Well, I've heard Alex Baldwin's thinking about running. Running as a Trump character.
Yeah, that would be pretty good, actually. I'd like that.
SNL is pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know why they get so upset about that. I think it's quite funny. I really like how he does that.
Yeah, he does it. He does it very good. But Trump has no sense of humor, so
no.
You can understand why his reaction to it. In fact, he wants to close it down. He wants to use the laws to close down comedy and satire.
Yeah, only if it's against him.
Yeah, exactly. Only if it's against him.
And it's funny. You've been writing now books on really gangsters or mob and crime and drugs and all that area, and I've always thought of Trump in that same category. Well,
there's been a lot of written about not a lot, but has been stuff written about his connection to the mob. And loans and all that back in New York City. So it's kind of interesting in terms of history. And what's more fascinating than a gangster, right?
Yeah.
Like Al Capone or Luciano or Pablo Escobar, or even El Chapo,
Yeah.
who just got sentenced in February, or not sentenced, he was convicted, and he's got June 25th, he's going to be sentenced, probably spend the rest of his life in American jail. But what's more fascinating than these guys, and how they become big-time gangsters? I think it's just fascinating. And why they do it, because they never get away with it, You could count the number of gangsters that got away with it on one hand, at that level.
Yeah.
But they do it, and...
I guess it's worth the ride,
Yeah, and so I've been interested in gangsters all my life. I never started writing about them until I was in my late 30s, and the way I got started I went to Colombia on a press junket. They invited some journalists, and they were trying to improve the image of the country because they still thought they could have a tourist trade at that time, and that's when the war with Escobar and the state was going on. So anyways, I went down there and didn't know anything about the country. Traveled all over the country, and the last day I met a woman, and we had a blind date, and that turned into a marriage.
Oh.
about 2 years later. And I was a Canadian, I was Canadian, and I never thought I'd ever get my American citizenship, but I went ahead and got it. And because it would have took forever to get her into the country, and so she came into the I got her into the country, and then she became an American citizen later. And now, of course, I got dual citizenship with Canada and the U.S. But I kept going back and back, and the war on drugs, as far as it related to Latin America, Colombia, getting hotter and hotter, and I was getting assignments like crazy, from magazines and newspapers, and I was developing a network of contacts there that set me up with sources. I ended up interviewing 3 presidents of Colombia and one vice president who was kidnapped by Escobar. In fact, the president too, Pastrana, was kidnapped too by the Medellin cartel, and it was just crazy. I mean, the country was just it was like Iraq.
Right.
And I mean, I remember sitting in the house of my brother-in-law and hearing a bomb go off, down about half a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile down the street, and it was very dangerous. You could get kidnapped for $25, and that happened. Some people in the neighborhood, my wife's family and all that, and so from there, I was doing all this writing. I was saying, well, Escobar goes down in '93. He gets killed on a rooftop, and nothing had ever been done about the Cali Cartel, who were the real powers in Colombia for a long time. I mean, not many people knew about them because they were very low key. So from there, I decided to do a book, which took me about 4 or 5 years, because I was a professor at university, and so I had a full-time job, so I had to, and I couldn't get off like I can now, being a full-time writer. So I had to spread it out, and finally did the book, and then that set me off in the area of writing books about crime.
When you're doing something like that, like the book on Cali, and it takes you years, you have to get out there in the field, and you have to get out there and be around all of these people that are doing these things. Now, do you find yourself scared at times, or do you worry about that kind of lifestyle?
People always ask that question, and I always say, I'm not crazy. I'm not going to take any chances, And I have been in situations where I just backed out because I thought it was too dangerous. And I've covered Northern Ireland before I discovered Colombia. I was reporting on Northern Ireland, and I interviewed IRA, ultra volunteer individuals that's the Protestant side in Northern Ireland. So I have a lot of experience in dealing with situations like that. But I have family there, and I have friends there, and they had my best interest. So they would advise me, about interviews. And I interviewed, a lot of people, like the DEA, for example. I never met a lot of the people. The phone is a great way to do it. Now you have Skype, right?
Yeah.
You can do it on Skype. You have text. You can text people. You can do complete interviews via text on that. So I was never in a situation where I was scared. I was a little nervous, put it that way, which is a little different than scared. But I never had a situation where somebody pulled a gun on me like they've done on some journalists on that. So maybe I was lucky.
Yeah, I would think, because there's people are doing bad things. How do you when you're first going to get together and do something like this, and you decide you're going to write on a gangland, how do you approach it then? Well,
the way I normally do is, and the other great tool, of course, is the internet, right? You've got the internet. If I'm going to do a subject, like say, for example, I'm going to do a biography of a gangster, and I don't know too much about, I'll get on the internet and do a so-called Google search, right? And try to find out as much background as I can. And I'll go to. I'm a trained librarian. I have a master's degree in librarianship and a master's in archival administration. So if there's one thing I know something about, it's research, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll end up going to the library, and I'll check some of the databases on the magazines and newspapers, and just collect everything I can on that. And then check for books. Check, see what books are out there on the subject. Hopefully, not much has been written book-wise. That means that your field is open, and makes it better possibility of selling a book. And then I'll read everything, and then make notes. I'll look names of people who should I interview, possible subject, breakdown of the chapters on that, and maybe places I have to go. And then after I do that, I develop a strategy on how I'm going to tackle the project, and it may involve some travel, so I'll have to try to arrange that, and then at some point I'll decide that I have enough material, or I can't find any more material. Sometimes that happens too. You exhaust what's available out there, and then I'll sit down and write. And I actually like the writing part of the process better than the research, which is kind of weird because I am trained as a researcher. But I enjoy the writing part of it a lot, and putting all that information together and into something that's people can enjoy and get something out of.
Yeah, yeah. Now, with a lot of these programs that talk about these type of gangland and drug cartels and all those stuff, the shows and the movies and stuff, do you find that most of it's pretty accurate when they portray the lifestyle?
I've done a lot of those. I've been on practically every cable channel, doing something on in there. In fact, I think I'm on a program every week. I'm on some program because they keep running them, and it's really weird. I'll get a Facebook message, "Hey, I saw you on TV," and I say, "What?" And I think about, "Oh yeah, that's probably one of those old programs." I ask them what it is, and it's been like 8 years. I've had mixed success with with these programs because they call me on, to be an expert talking head, right? I'm supposed to know something about the subject. And when I first got started doing this, Frank Lucas, you remember Frank Lucas, the movie American Gangster?
Right.
Yeah, right. And so he came out, everybody thought he was God's gift to gangland. His story was just amazing and true and all that sort of stuff. But I had researched it, and most of it was BS.
Yeah.
And so they invited me on, and I was sort of contrary. Everybody else was coming up, and they didn't know what they were talking about because they hadn't researched them. And they were saying all these myths and absurd stories about what he had done and who he was and all that. And essentially, they sort of censored me. They took what I say something like, "Oh yeah, Frank Lucas was a genuine big time gangster," but they would put the first part, but they wouldn't do the second part, the but part. And then I would explain, why he wasn't as big as he says he was, on that sort of stuff. So. And a lot of these shows, they're not really knowledgeable about crime. The people that do the interviewing and all that,
right.
And they know just enough to do the show. And so a lot of times you'll see a lot of inaccuracies in the show, and they don't really have the time or the money to correct the errors that they make. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
There are some good shows. But a lot of them, you have to take them with a grain of salt in terms of accuracy.
So now, I guess, is this true? You've got an interview coming up with Chapo lawyer?
Yeah, on my Crime Beat show, a friend suggested that I interview. He's a fellow lawyer, and I thought, well, I wouldn't get him. He wouldn't want to talk. And he didn't want to talk. I approached him at first because the trial was going on, and that's natural. Lawyers don't talk while the trial's going on. But he said, catch me after the trial. I'd love to come on your show. I said, great. And so I checked him out and waited, and the trial ended, and El Chapo lost. They lost the case, and then I contacted him again, and he said, yeah, so we're going to talk about, El Chapo, the man, who he is, and a little bit about what happened in the trial. And then they're going to appeal. There was a Vice article that came out right after the trial, which revealed that a lot of the jurors were accessing the media while the trial was going on, which is a no-no, right? You're supposed to buck that out, and they had their own opinions, about El Chapo being guilty and all that. And he's a big-time gangster and all that, but everybody gets a fair trial, right? In America, that's the principle. So he thinks that he has a good chance of getting. I don't think the verdict turned out. Maybe another trial with El Chapo. We'll see what happens. on that. And of course, he was big time. He was essentially worth about they estimate about $14 billion when he was arrested. And he's a product of what happened in the drug war. What I was researching, because the success of what happened in Colombia with the takedown of the Medellin Cartel and Pablo Escobar, and the Cali Cartel with the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers who headed them, led to Mexico becoming the power in the drug trade. And that's why we have all these big-time Mexican drug traffickers, from the mid-'90s on, that have flooded the U.S. with drugs. And that's an example too of the absurdity on the war on drugs, because I think it's much worse now, right? Having the center of the drug trade right on your border than it was in Latin America, in Colombia.
Right. And are they as well controlled too now, Mexican drug lords?
Well, they're everywhere. I mean, I saw one report where they estimated that the Mexican cartels, and there's so many of them, because the drug trade is so lucrative. They're in over 200 cities. They're entrenched in 200 cities, and it's not just cocaine now. Opioids, methamphetamine. The methamphetamine trade was largely epidemic, which started in the 90s. And has hit the United States big. Is largely a Mexican gangster phenomenon. They're largely responsible for that. So the whole situation has gotten worse. And of course, in Mexico, the corruption, is just as bad as it was in Colombia. In the trial of El Chapo, there was a report. Somebody accused the former president of Mexico, Nieto, of taking a $100 million bribe for letting El Chapo go. On that $100 million bribe, they said. Of course, he denied it, and I don't know if there's any further investigation on it, but it just goes to show you the power of the cartels, continuing power of the cartels, because that's the way it was in Colombia.
Yeah. Now, Colombia had a big gang war between Escobar and Cali, right? And that left thousands dead. Do you think that's going to happen again?
Well, it's been happening. I mean, there's always conflict going on, but conflict going on between cartels, fighting each other for territory. In the Colombia aspect of this whole thing, it's really interesting because eventually, at the end of this war, I call it the biggest gang war in history. It pitted the Medellin Cartel against the Cali Cartel in a war of survival. Everybody was against Escobar because he had ticked everybody off. The way he had dealt with people, killing his rivals, backstabbing them and all that. And so it became a war. Where the state and the gangsters essentially were allies in the war against Escobar, and they finally took him out. And he was alone at the end with one bodyguard, and was killed on a rooftop. But it was essentially, the Delta Force of the U.S., you had the Colombian National Police, and you had the Cali Cartel with its intelligence, going against. That shows you how powerful he was, and they all went against Escobar. And eventually, he was taken down. But it didn't mean anything, because all it meant was that the Cali Cartel were now the kingpins of the drug trade, and they had been the kingpins, long before Escobar left the scene. There was estimates that by the early 90s they had 90% of the cocaine trade, but they were very shrewd about how they went about operating. They kept a low profile. They tried to portray themselves as gentlemen. Los Caballeros de Cali. And they preferred have you heard this expression, the bribe over the bullet? They preferred to bribe somebody, but they were just as vicious as they had to be. And they corrupted the country. They almost won the election. It could have been the first narco-democracy in history. In the mid-'90s, they put $66 million into Ernesto Samper, who was a presidential candidate, into his campaign. And if it wasn't for the revelation of a cassette that was given to Pastrana, who was running against him. Maybe the Cali Cartel could have had a foothold in the Colombian government on that, but that turned the tide against the beginning of the tide against the Cali Cartel, and eventually they were taken down.
So where does Colombia sit as far as this type of drug activity now that Mexico is so big?
Could you believe this? Everybody heard of the Medellin cartel, right?
Yeah. And
it's based in Medellin. Medellin is the number one retirement destination for Americans, according to the AARP. You believe that?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the number one destination. So a lot of Americans are retiring in the former stronghold of Pablo Escobar, where the Medellin cartel. And Colombia has changed immensely. I mean, it's unbelievable how it's changed. When I was going there for a long period of time, I couldn't go more than 10 miles outside of Bogota, which is the capital where my family lived, because the guerrillas were operating, and my family was scared of, was afraid that I would be kidnapped, and so I never went there. Now you could travel anywhere. You could pretty well travel anywhere in Colombia, and the kidnapping is down. And essentially, the Colombian traffickers that followed the Medellin and the Cali cartel said, "Look, this is crazy. It makes you too exposed." And so what they did was they turned essentially the trade over to the Mexicans, and they just supply the cocaine, and the Mexicans distribute it. And so the Mexicans are the ones now. Of course, they make more money too, on that, but it's more low key. The drug trade in Colombia is more low key. Although there always be a problem, with drugs because it's so prevalent.
Yeah, yeah, and so I guess the war on drugs that Reagan started, or even before him.
Well, actually, it was Nixon. Really,
Nixon.
It was, in the mid '70s, and it's always been tied to politics. Nixon declared war because he needed a political issue, and the same thing with Reagan. He was not doing too well in the midterms in '82, and so he came up with this and essentially militarized the war on drugs. And I hate that expression, war on drugs. We're dealing with a social problem, drug abuse, right? It's not a war. You know what I mean? Yeah, and it's a crazy term. And also, use the term war on drugs, it means that somebody's got to lose, somebody's got to win. And the drug issue is not like that. It's more nuanced, than that in terms of dealing with it. So on that, but yeah, and so it's essentially been the strategy, since the mid '70s. And if you look at the way money's spent, more than 2/3 of the money is spent on trying to combat supply, and only 1/3 on treatment. And I think it's been a wrong-headed approach. It hasn't done anything except lead to a loss of life and spending millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars, wasting billions of dollars. Beating your head against the wall, trying to come up with an answer that really can't be given. I mean, in that way. So but fortunately, it's changing now. Marijuana is legal in Canada, right?
Yes, all the way.
And here in the U.S., and medical marijuana is getting the respect that it deserves, because we all know that it does have medicinal properties. And so that's the beginning. You still have Neanderthal forces at work, that trying to turn the clock back, but to what? The situation that we had, which hasn't really solved anything, and hasn't led to any change, in so-called war on drugs.
Yeah, and so where do you see it all going now? Do you think Mexico's going to be kind of the center of it all, or is that going to fall apart, or what?
Well, it's interesting because the big drug cartels now are are the pharmaceutical companies, right? You know, they're the ones that are responsible for the opioid crisis, you know, as we've seen. So, you know, it's the problem's even worse now because you've got these legal drugs, you know, that are being abused, and you have, you know, big pharmaceutical manufacturers that are helping, you know, to create the problem in order to make big money. So, you know, it's never going to go away. You know, it's never going to go away. It's always going to be, you know, drugs of some kind, right? You just look at the history of the war on drugs, the way drugs, you know, shifted from one drug to another. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, ecstasy. You know, even in the 60s, LSD was there for a while. So, and it's just part of man's makeup, right? They want to hide. Reality is too tough for a lot of people, and they want to deal with it in right ways, whether it's alcohol or drugs or religion or whatever. You know, they'll come up with something to help make reality a little more palpable.
Yeah, an escape, you know.
Yeah, it's an escape. Yeah, that. But you know, my philosophy has been, or my view has been, you know, harm reduction. You know, because I was in the Netherlands and I studied there. I interviewed a whole bunch of people back in the '90s, and their whole approach is harm reduction. You know, we're a puritanical society, given our history, and we want to stamp out sin, right? And but they're a little different. They want to control it. And so they look at the drug problem is that we can never get rid of it. Just like prostitution, you know, you can't get rid of prostitution. So what they do, they put, you know, the prostitutes in an area, the red light district, and control it. You know, give them tests, cut down the venereal disease and that sort of stuff. And that's what they've done with drugs. You know, reduce the harm, and from what I see. And what I've read and what I hear, it's worked.
Yeah, it seems to be. It seems to be a better approach. You know, even Portugal's done that with legalizing.
Yeah, heroin with you know, giving out needles, for example, right?
Yeah.
On that, and Canada is becoming a leader, right? You're Canadian.
We do that all the time. And they also have the beer places that you can go in as an alcoholic and they give you liquor, and it's all timed and watched, and there's all sorts of.
That's what I call harm reduction.
Yeah.
Right. You know, trying to reduce the harm to the person and to society, on that sort of thing. Yeah, it's kind of ironic because, you know, I'm a product of the '60s, so, you know, I had my share of drugs and all that. But I don't even, you know, think about marijuana anymore and all that sort of stuff. So I have no personal interest, you know, in it myself, you know, because I don't use drugs. But I really think that you know, this whole movement now towards legalization is really good, and it's really a beneficial change that is going to lead us in a better direction as a society.
Well, it's, you know, hopefully it all goes in the right direction. So. So how long what further are you going to do on this type of research? Are you going to keep on going through the Mexican cartels and pursue that, or are you going a different direction?
Well, I go about 120 years old.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm still interested in the subject. I've got a really good possibility of doing a book with an English drug lord. I can't talk about it because he's still in prison. I'm waiting for him to get out of prison. But I'm more interested in screenplays now. You know, so I've been writing, you know, screenplays on crime, and so I'm moving in a new direction, I guess the way to put it, in terms of my writing. But I'm still interested in crime. You know, I'm still interested in the whole subject of crime, and I'll be writing about it. But I'll be doing like screenplays. And eventually I hope to write a novel. You know, I've got some ideas, but there's only so many hours in a day, right? And you got to make a living. That's something that makes money, you know, puts food on the table. So, but I'm going to write maybe one more book, I think, if this works out with the English drug lord, and if that works out, then I think I'll do that. But I definitely want to see my name on the screen. big screen, because it's always been a dream of mine, ever since I saw Roy Rogers as a kid.
Yeah.
Gene Autry and all that when I was growing up, and I always thought it would be great to see your name on a big screen. That's what I'm going to do.
Well, keep on working, and it might happen.
Yeah.
I
should think you're going to be on my show, right?
Yeah, someone's forcing me to be. Yeah, I'm booked on in
April 18th.
Yeah.
And we have a little chat. You're a resident expert on Canada, so I come you on and you give the Canadian perspective of what's happening in America for about 5 minutes, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, it's an endless thing going on. So.
Yeah, on that thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, I appreciate being on.
Yeah, and what's now? Give people your contact information or website and all that, so they can find
the
you.
website www.ron Chepesiuk ChepesiukCom. That's my my website. That's probably the best place to go to gather information. I'm on Facebook too. If you're on Facebook, friend me. I'm a very friendly guy, and I'll friend you back, and we can go from there.
You're like Joe Biden.
Yeah, except less touchy.
Oh, come on.
Oh, I should mention too that the crime show, artistfirst.com, is the crime show where Alan will be on, and this week we got Chappell's lawyer, so that should be interesting.
Really interesting stuff you do. Yeah, that's fascinating. And we'll have, of course, that, and we have your books and site put on our site as well, so people can just click on it. And
you got a great show, and I enjoyed being on.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Ron. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, then, and good luck with your writing, too.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.